Parsons was culture shock. I mean, I love everybody, and so I was excited to be around these different people, but definitely being in the classroom, like to this day, when I speak to like freshmen at Parsons, I always talk about my experience when I first got there, like being someone who is confident in the work that they're producing, and like you work your ass off at Parsons and you stay up long nights and you don't sleep, and then you go to class and you have to like present your work in front of the class, and then these kids, your classmates, your peers who did not stay up with you all night, did not travel to the Bronx with you, did not travel with you to the city carrying your project on the train,
right,
get this time to like literally critique the shit out of your work. And when I was a freshman and I first got to school, that bothered me.
It was the last day of class, freshman year, and we all had a class assignment. One portrait for every student in the class. So by the end of the second semester, we had all been in the same freshman class, locked in for 2 full semesters. So we had to do 25 different portraits. So the last day of class comes, and sure enough, we have a group critique, just like we would on any other day. And we start going through the projects, and they're all amazing. Then we get to Jane. Part of the assignment was to incorporate some kind of personality trait or character trait from the subject into the actual piece. One of our classmates was really into romance novels, so she drew her looking at a romance novel book cover. And then we got to my portrait. Yeah. And then she proceeds to present a portrait of a young man, small, real tiny, all black silhouette, standing in the middle of the street with one single street light shining directly on him and buildings in the background. And that was it. There was ample time for us to all get to know each other. She got to know our other classmates enough to like do accurate portraits of them. So it was very puzzling to me how when it got to me, it was just some guy standing in the middle of the street. And after 10 months, 2 semesters, I had grown quite tired of suppressing my questions in instances like when my classmates would say, "Your work is so urban." What about an Egyptian goddess or an abstract painting or a painting of outer space or a painting of a flower? Like, what do any of these things have to do with being urban? I told myself I'm in art school, we're all the same, I'm with a bunch of other oddballs, we're all equal. That's what I told myself. And then I learned that we're not. And you don't see me the same way I see you. So on this particular day, I raised my hand, and as politely as I could, I said, "Why does my portrait look like this?" I'm just standing in the middle of the street. Everyone else had portraits that had to do with their personality. What about that displays my personality? And her response was, "Well, you know, you're from Queens and you're from the city, and you know, it's just like, I just wanted to draw like your background." What about that has anything to do with my personality? Got quiet. She got defensive and was like, "You know, it's just a school project. It's not that serious. You're making a big deal out of it." And then the class chimed in. "We're just trying to go home. It's not that serious. It's just a class project, da 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 da." Mind you, all these people had amazing portraits that suggested that they were people with depth, with character. Mine just looked to be a stereotype. Lucky for me, our instructor was fair, and she advocated for me and asked the same question. Why does his look like this and everyone else's looks like that? Why is he depicted like this with no real attention to who he is as a person? And she, and then the rest of the class as well, fell silent. It was as if no one had an excuse for this broad stroke stereotype of a portrait. And then we just moved on. And in that awkwardness, I realized it was not likely that people were gonna see me for who I am. It was more likely people were going to see me for my nature. And while that's a big part of who anyone is, it's not all they are. It just made me wonder, like, wow, is this what you think of me? After all the art, after all the time we spent together, after all the things I've said during critique, I haven't demonstrated that I'm a person, that I am somebody. More than just some dude standing in the middle of a street in an urban environment. I had been told my entire life from my grandfather, black people don't do art. Black people don't do art. What do you? And her lack of interest in who I am past where I'm from demonstrated to me, perhaps he's right.
There seems to be like not that many people on earth that like happen to be black that make art. So I figure like, wouldn't you want any and every opportunity to like, I don't know, like stake claim like I'm an artist and I'm black at the same time, but she was just like, nah, I don't want. And then the next question for her was like, by the moderator was, how do you feel about doing work in Harlem given its history? And she was like, oh, I don't know how to feel. And I was like, there it is. There it is.
The first function of education is identity. Naeem Akbar. This same education is expected to help us construct the kind of life we all want. However, in the past 3 years, the arts in the US has found it increasingly difficult to breathe.
I wish I knew the answer to why it is that we didn't support our artists the way that I feel should. I see that it's a systemic issue, and I think that there needs to be changes. I mean, I don't know if it traces back to like the Industrial Revolution or something about some concept that the more you make and sell, that's kind of what will make you more important, or that's what's valuable. For a really long time, I think the first thing is that there's this way that we think that play is childish, and that when you become an adult, you need to become serious in order to make a living and to be a real adult. And I think the nature of creativity is playful, and it's exploratory, and there's a lot of curiosity. And there's something about it that's it's organic and spontaneous, and in many ways it doesn't fit into the structure of how it is that we're supposed to live our lives, which in many ways can be linear and prescribed. So as a result of that, I think that people start to feel like they can't mesh that part of themselves into their current lives. And so over time they just stop playing, stop getting curious about things, stop exploring, and then it goes away.
I think in our education system, it's been based on the Industrial Revolution for the most part, with this whole, teacher as knowledge bearer and student as receiver of knowledge. Memorize for tests and take tests. And that needs to just go away. That's just not the role that we want to be promoting anymore, whereas it's more seminar style and it's more, you have a math project, let's make that happen as a visual arts project and demonstrate your math skills. In that line of thinking.
Initially, I came up here and I got accepted in NYU in the theater program. And unfortunately, my grandmother was not my legal parent. So they had a program in Virginia at that time that anybody in that circumstance, wherever you got accepted in school, you get a free ride. So I got into NYU. I thought I was on my way to New York. And Ronald Reagan, yeah, he just nixed that off the books.
Prior to 1980, arts funding was directed at programs within institutions like public parks, museums, theaters, and public schools. And while not a perfect situation, arts funding at least existed thanks to an independent agency known as the National Endowment of the Arts. Offering funding for arts projects nationwide, the NEA has filled the gap for many communities across the country. Until the Reagan administration, that is.
When budgets are cut, it's the arts that get cut first. And unfortunately, I think that if you start kids out young learning to appreciate art, you really develop something in them, a creative purpose, an appreciation for art that they don't really get if you teach it to them later.
The first start date was when I was a kid. My mother, who was an amateur painter, would bring home art materials. She would paint with me and I'd do comic book art and this, that, and the other. We were, me, Russell, and Reverend Run, were allowed to express ourselves. We weren't stifled. We went to school, got good grades, for the most part. Our parents allowed us to have our own thoughts about things.
Art is an empowering medium. It is a freedom of expression, and it's something inherent to our lineage. Art is pre-verbal, pre-lingual, and there's something really deeply profound in the symbolism and the art making. And I think people in positions of power don't want commoners or the public to have access to their birthright and their power.
So there isn't this guy introducing this kid to all these other art forms. And there's no real strong influence to say, hey man, come over here, check this out.
Budget director David Stockman first proposed to cut the NEA's funding in 1980. By 1995, Stockton would rejoice as half of the NEA's budget was cut. As a result of this, private dollars then became the lion's share of arts funding. So, individuals and groups that don't have access to mega donors with deep pockets were, well, shit out of luck.
It's just not a common thing for us having money. And when you see what it can do for you, and you won't have to worry about things like eating or having your phone cut off or not being able to give your kids a present on Christmas.
According to The Atlantic, as of 2012, there are 111,000 arts organizations in the US. Of this 111,000, 40,000 over $25,000, while 70,000 have budgets under $25,000. The 40,000 groups with budgets over $25,000 have demonstrated dramatic growth. Revenue went from $14 billion in 1995 to $31 billion in 2012. Earned income accounted for 41% of arts revenue at $12.7 billion. up 37% since 1995. Making the largest source of revenue for the arts, individual giving. A whopping $13 billion per year, accounting for 42% of total arts revenue. Up 67% since 1995. Let's make up a scenario. Let's say you come from a community that has a lot of people that have a lot of money. And individual giving is as simple as asking for a favor. But what if you don't come from a community with lots of people that have lots of money? In fact, what if you come from an impoverished area that knows little to nothing about art? Or for that matter, why it's even worth investing in. Philanthropy, in a 2011 report, concluded that 55% of gifts and grants went to 2% of arts organizations. This was the 2% of arts organizations with budgets over $5 million. In 2012, the stats only get scarier. 1% of arts organizations, the 1% with budgets over $10 million, received about 50% of all contributed funding for the arts for 2012. However, a mere 4% of all arts revenue came from public sources in 2014. Based on statistics provided by the NCC, out of about 40,000 arts organizations with budgets over $25,000, 450 arts organizations have budgets over $10 million. There are 39,570 groups that even if they only service 1,000 people per year, they'd still be serving more people than larger organizations. 58%. These numbers speak to one of America's most chronic socio-political, socio-economic issues. Systematic inequality for disenfranchised communities of color.
You're not coming from a community with a strong sense of leadership to say, hey, here's another option. I remember telling my brother, even back in the day, I said, the only thing Denzel has on me is opportunity.
You know, white boy grows up, sees dad as a lawyer, he can say, I can do that too. Black boy grows up, sees dad on Def Poetry, he says, oh, I can be a poet, and he goes home and starts writing ciphers. You know, or whatever it is, people emulate things. They emulate, and everybody wants to be successful, so people emulate success. So the more success that we see in the creative fields, then we will have more creative people going in that direction.
If you're from a disenfranchised community, it is unlikely that you have access to millionaires willing to become donors.
People even in Jamaica, Queens had chickens, dude. It was the first generation of people coming from down south. And so some families was country than others. And some families had some chickens, and roosters. So you hear some roosters in the morning. And so Jamaica, Queens was a lower middle class to middle class black neighborhood. There was a generation or two where drugs hurt the black family. That was because of the wave of drugs that hit in the late 60s, then toppled by the crack epidemic. And so that put a hurting on urban black families. But I've been more lucky than most because I got two rich brothers I can fall back on. And most people don't have mega millionaire brothers. But you know, so that's why Rush Philanthropic exists. It's my idea, but Russell was able to raise most of the money because he knows a bunch of rich people. You know, we started it. I said, well, Run, you're gonna perform, and Russell, you're gonna put up money for the space, and we're gonna create this foundation. So Run DMC performed, and Russell did this. He rented out the Puck building. We raised $250,000. But that's the point of family helping each other. You know, same thing with Def Poetry. And you know, I said, Russell, I want to steal Def Comedy's name, turn it into Def Poetry, and we're gonna make a poetry TV show. He said, get poetry. Nobody did it. Def Poetry took the nation by storm. You know, we were able to support each other. So I had some support systems for my ideas that other people might not have. But the point is, there's always a way to get there. My way might have been a little easier because I had some rich brothers. But if you got an idea, you can figure out how to make it work.
So where's the support supposed to come from? The common defense to most resources being funneled to Eurocentric arts organizations is that with larger donations, large organizations like Lincoln Center, serve much more people than smaller groups. The numbers say different. Based on statistics provided by the NCC, out of about 40,000 arts organizations with budgets over $25,000, 450 have budgets over $10 million. According to the Washington Post, in 2018, President Trump's budget blueprint calls for the elimination of 4 arts organizations, including the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Institute of Museums and Library Services, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Altogether, this cut would eliminate $971 million from the national budget. Still awaiting Congress's go-ahead, the issue is of top importance to Trump's administration, as it redefines the responsibility of the federal government. Should this potential precedent be set, other cuts could be soon to follow. Cuts to agencies like PBS affect the public directly. Imagine growing up in a world without Sesame Street. Pretty soon, your kids won't have to.
My son is 8 years old, and he's really lucky last year to have an excellent art teacher in 2nd grade, where he was coming home and telling me, "Mommy, do you know who Keith Haring is?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do, but how do you?" He was asking me, instead of me having to drag him to the museum, because of this art teacher. I mean, what 8-year-old does that? You know, it just, to me, it blew my mind. That's what's missing. We don't have art teachers like that in the elementary schools.
It's the job of those that come before to be able to like pull the plug, drain it out, shake them up and tell them what it is and who they are. And so that's not really going on. Our local leaders really have to step up and understand the fierce urgency of right now.
It's not valued. It's not something that our current times values as important to our evolution, and there's an emphasis in math and science and more linear left brain thinking, which propels society in certain roles that then will help, the structures continue in the ways that they are.
A lack of arts patronage means a lack of balanced arts literacy. A lack of balanced arts literacy means a lack of appreciation and participation in the arts. A lack of appreciation and participation in the arts means a lack of examples of excellence within the arts. A lack of examples of excellence within the arts means a lack of general patronage for the arts. And the cycle continues.